Yo. Well, it would appear that it's that time again, iceberg time. And this is no ordinary iceberg either. This is the Harry Potter Iceberg by Reddit user Crystal Conspiracy. Now I know a lot of you are waiting for the next part of the ultimate creepypasta iceberg to come out, and not to worry, it is being worked on and will be coming out very soon, as well as the grand finale to the AVG and retrospective. I just thought it'd be fun if we could go through one of the more series-specific icebergs I've been meaning to do, and that can easily be done in one single, albeit large video. But before we jump into the Black Lake of Hogwarts and go searching for the Chamber of Secrets, it's time we talk about raiding some dungeons, taking down the Demon Lord, ascending the Doom Tower, fighting against millions of real players in the arena. It's time to talk about Raid Shadow Legends. In Raid, there are over 500 champions, all with their own unique skills for you to explore millions of champion combinations and tactics to build your team and develop your champions as you take down raid bosses, dungeon runs, campaign battles, and PvP arena matches. Or in other words, you can raid your way. When Raid reached out to me, I was very interested in finally trying out this immensely popular game. And what I like about the game is the large assortment of champions and their abilities, as well as the overall gameplay loop of fighting through campaign missions and dungeons and slowly leveling up all your champions into truly unstoppable forces of nature. I also love looking at all the various champions and kind of seeing what I have to look forward to. Some of my personal favorites being Canderfawn, this demon spawn Cthulhu looking champ, and Astralon, this Sacred Order Dark Angel that kind of reminds me of Evangelion for whatever reason. And even better, this month Raid's got a non-stop schedule of summer events and activities. Everything from special fusion events to get you brand new legendary champions, tournaments against other players, and not to mention they're also releasing 5 badass new champions, each one of them looking amazing, has cool new abilities, and I personally cannot wait to try each of them out. The barbecue pit just got lit for Raid Summer, and there are some colossal updates coming very soon, so there's really never been a better time to get started. If you want to get a massive head start in Raid, all you have to do is hit the link in the description of this video, or scan this QR code right here. New players will get an epic hero, Chinaru, who is one of the best champions for conquering the Doom Tower. You'll also get 200k silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon an awesome champion as soon as you get into the game. And again, Chinaru is a very cool looking champion, so you can't lose here. You'll also find extra rewards here in your inbox for the next 30 days only. And it's that easy. Just click the link in the description and I'll see you in the game. Thank you again to Raid Shadow Legends for sponsoring this video. So before we jump into this, I do want to note right off the bat that if you're not familiar with the Harry Potter franchise, a lot of this iceberg may be a bit confusing to you. You don't need to know like extreme knowledge. I mean, I guess this iceberg is going to kind of help you in gaining that, but if you're at least familiar with like all the movies, you should be good to go. But all the same, for that reason, I'm going to be going to each one of these topics assuming that you have at least cursory knowledge of the plot. But even still, I will try to provide a little bit of context for those that at the very least have watched the movies or read the books, but maybe they haven't for a good long time. Harry Potter is one of those series that I grew up alongside as the books and films came out, and without a doubt was one of the series that got me into reading and writing from a young age. And while a lot of the newer stuff is really bad, in my opinion, I always cherish the 7-book saga as something unforgettable and truly magical. So if you somehow never experienced the series, I would still highly recommend it, with the addendum that it's probably best to just watch the original movies or read the original books and just leave it at that. Also, spoilers for the whole franchise, obviously. I also want to thank this Iceberg's creator, Crystal Conspiracy, for not only making such an in-depth chart for this franchise, but also providing a detailed answer for every one of these topics. As a longtime fan, I had known about a fair bit of the content on this chart, but I'll admit there is also a fair bit that I have never heard of before, so thank you to them for going the extra mile and helping me greatly in putting this video together, or at least pointing me in the right direction of where to look for more information. But with all that being said, let's knock on a few bricks, ready our galleon and sickles, and mosey our way on through Diagon Alley. Harry Potter movies. Most people are aware of the Harry Potter movies, and like any successful movie franchise based on a book series, it far and beyond became the de facto source most people pull information from with this series. It's the saga about a young boy named Harry Potter who lived a life being abused by his aunt and uncle Vernon, before the day comes when he comes of age to go to Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, discovering through the lovable Hagrid that
you're a wizard, Harry.
The series goes on to see his many adventures at Hogwarts and the wizarding world in general, as well as the friends he makes, the enemies he faces, and usually solving some sort of mystery at Hogwarts as well. Eventually the series evolves into a story about fate, destiny, good versus evil, and the nature of life and death itself, so it gets pretty heavy later on. There are 8 movies, the last 2 being a duology that finishes the final book. The movies are truly a wonderful time, very cozy, especially the first couple, but it is important to note that they do change several things, both big and small, from the books for the sake of a better runtime and structure for the film. There are some things I wish they would have kept, like the finale of book 6 for example, and a lot of parts for book 6 actually, but overall these are well known and beloved by many. Wizarding World. This is just an encompassing term for the Harry Potter franchise now that Fantastic Beasts exists. Which, speaking of, Fantastic Beasts is a spin-off franchise that currently has 2 films out. It's not been well received by fans, and as of the second one, not critically either. It's planned to be a 5-movie series, but the third film has been in production hell for some time now. I'll be frank, these movies feel nothing like Harry Potter, and while there's an attempt to try and tell a different story within the wizarding world, ultimately it just feels unimportant and boring to me. It's got none of the charm, grand storytelling, or mystery that made the book and movie series so great, so whether it ends up finishing or not is really of no concern to me. Oh, and before it was a movie series, it was originally the title of a book you could buy explaining the creatures of the wizarding world. Which leads me to Harry Potter books. The thing that started it all. There are 7 books in all, and they were released between 1997 to 2007, and defined many children's childhoods. I couldn't even begin to get into what makes these books so special, but to say the very least, they certainly do capture the imagination with atmosphere and characters that feel like home after long. There are also several elements from the books that are just way better than the movie's execution, but controversially I'd also say there's a couple elements from the movies that I think are better executed than the books as well, so overall I'd recommend both. Cursed Child. The Cursed Child is a stage play that continues after the final book in the series, The Deathly Hallows, and tells the story of Harry Potter's son, Albus Severus, and his unlikely friendship with Scorpius Malfoy, the son of Harry's former nemesis, Draco, as they were both sorted into Slytherin. Something which is quite controversial, as all the other Potters had been sorted into Gryffindor. And since this wasn't on the iceberg, I figured I'd just add this in here. The 4 houses of Hogwarts are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, and Slytherin, each named after the 4 founders of the School of Hogwarts: Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin. Gryffindors value courage, bravery, nerve, and chivalry, their mascot being a lion. Hufflepuff, which kind of don't fucking exist in the books or the movies that often, kind of the forgotten house, they value hard work, patience, justice, and loyalty, and their house mascot is a badger. Ravenclaw values intelligence, learning, wisdom, and wit, and their house mascot is an eagle. And finally, Slytherin values ambition, cunning, leadership, and resourcefulness, and their house mascot is a serpent. While it's a little bit more complicated for the sake of where the characters end up, Gryffindor is the good guy's house, Slytherin is the bad guy's house, Hufflepuff is the fucking nobody's house, and Ravenclaw is the quirky side character house. But I digress. The story of the Cursed Child follows what it's like being the son of someone as great and as popular and as important as Harry Potter, and all the expectations that come with that. Most consider this play to be the de facto book 8 in the series, since the script has also been released as a book and it comes after the last book in the series. But personally, I'm not really a fan of it myself, and it doesn't feel in line with the other novels and has some major plot holes and twists that straight up feel like contradictions to the rest of the franchise that seriously ruin it for me, and quite a few other Harry Potter fans as well. The worst twist is probably that Lord Voldemort, the Dark Lord, got it on with Bellatrix Lestrange, and now their daughter is at Hogwarts and is messing up shit with a time turner, and it just all feels like excessively bad fanfiction. But hey, it's an interesting premise at least. J.K. Rowling transphobia. So I'm going to be brief here, since most people are aware of this and it's kind of been the only topic of discussion surrounding the franchise and its creator as of late. J.K. Rowling expressed some opinions on her Twitter account about trans people that were quite controversial, namely after a tweet where she was responding to an article that was titled "Opinion: Creating a More Equal Post-COVID-19 World for People Who Menstruate," which she retweeted with "People who menstruate. I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out. Wombend? Wimpund? Womund?" unquote. People were very upset with her for saying this, and so she then doubled down saying, quote, "If sex isn't real, there's no same-sex attraction. If sex isn't real, the lived reality of women globally is erased. I know and love trans people, but erasing the concept of sex removes the ability of many to meaningfully discuss their lives. It isn't hate to speak the truth. The idea that women like me, who've been empathetic to trans people for decades, feeling kinship because they're vulnerable in the same way as women, i.e. to male violence, hate trans people because they think sex is real and has lived consequences, is nonsense. I respect every trans person's right to live any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them. I'd march with you if you were discriminated against on the basis of being trans. At the same time, my life has been shaped by being female. I do not believe it's hateful to say so," unquote. That's the long and short of it. There have been other developments in this discussion, but again, I'd like to be brief since even people who have never watched or read Harry Potter have heard of this already. I'm not disregarding the importance of the discussion, mind you, but this video probably isn't the place for it. Plus, I'll be honest, I stopped following J.K. Rowling on Twitter a long time ago because I wasn't a fan of some of her opinions, and more relevant to this video, random bits of lore she would throw out and into the ether about her series that was never in the books or the movies, just stuff that she came up with on the spot, such as wizard shit on the floor. So according to J.K. Rowling, via Twitter, as well as her old Pottermore site, which we'll get into later, wizards took care of their business back in the day by dumping their ass on the floor and then using magic to make it go away. I don't think you need to elaborate much more on this one, but it does make me wonder, do they light it on fire? Do they just make it disappear? Is it still there? Do they fucking transfer it to some other island or something? Is there just like a landfill full of wizard shit someplace? I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait till Harry Potter and the septic tank of secrets to find that sort of lore out. The Deathly Hallows. Deathly Hallows are 3 magical items from a fable as told within the namesake of the final book. The story goes that 3 brothers came to a bridge that travelers often died on and used magic to get across it safely. Death felt cheated by the 3 brothers, as so many had died on that bridge before, and so he decided to play a sort of cruel trick on all of them. He told them for crossing the bridge where others fell, he would grant them each one wish. The first brother asked for a wand that could defeat any other wand in battle. The second brother asked for a way to bring people back to life. And the third brother asked for a way so death could see him no longer, nor follow him. So the first brother flaunted his powerful wand around the town, killing his enemies and what have you, but ultimately had his throat slit that same night. Thus, death collected the first brother. The second brother used a stone plucked from the river by death to be able to see his beloved wife again. But this only brought him more pain seeing her this way, and not being able to truly be with her. And so he to once again touch her. Thus death collected the second brother. The third brother, however, traveled far and wide, fooling death at every turn, and eventually lived on to be an old man with his own son, and would eventually give his cloak of invisibility, which he used to cheat death over and over again, over to him, and in the end met with death gladly, the both departing to the afterlife as equals. That story connects not only with the 3 magical items of that book, but also runs in line with the major themes of said book and the series as a whole, which, speaking of, Christianity themes. Believe it or not, there was a point where I was planning on making an entire video on this topic alone, as many will point to the obvious examples such as Harry Potter being a Jesus figure of sorts, with him sacrificing himself for the greater good of the world before then being resurrected to life once more, or Dumbledore very much being a godlike figure imparting advice to Harry Potter. Or how about all the deaths from characters in general that are noble sacrifices in fighting the forces of evil. Voldemort and his followers' symbol being the snake, the serpent, the Leviathan, a creature that symbolizes the devil and temptation of all kinds throughout the Bible. But then there's also ones that I never hear very many people bring up, like when Harry is at the lake with his godfather Sirius Black, and the two of them are having their souls ripped away from them by Dementors, and you have someone out in the distance save them both with this stag Patronus, the only thing that staves off the creatures. Harry originally thinks it's his father, but when he goes back in time to that exact moment, his father never comes to save them, and instead Harry himself has to save himself and his godfather from the Dementors, which is how it happened because of time travel, and yeah, I'm not going to get into that. But the symbolism here is that the son, Harry, the father, who is also revealed to just be Harry, and the spirit, that thing being the Patronus, the stag, is a perfect symbolism for the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, otherwise known as the Godhead, the Trinity of Christianity, which again, if you're not familiar with those ideas, I'd highly suggest looking into it. Even if you're not Christian, it's at least very interesting. You can watch wendigoon's video on Christian theory. He does a pretty good job in explaining it in a digestible format. Nonetheless, Harry Potter is chock full of Christian themes that have been there since basically book 1. So yeah, pretty cool. J.K. Rowling's train ride. Famously, J.K. Rowling claims to have come up with the entire story of the entire franchise of Harry Potter on a very long train ride. Which I mean, I suppose makes sense with how you have to use a magical train ride to get to Hogwarts in the books and movies. Which reminds me. All aboard, all aboard. Come now, let's take a seat. I'll order us some pumpkin pastries and chocolate-covered frogs for our trip. It's going to be a rather long night after all. Harry Potter games. Harry Potter has multiple video game adaptations. Some good, some bad. A lot of people are familiar with the PS1 Sorcerer's or Philosopher's Stone game, which has these butt-ugly 3D models, and I can't blame you for it. Though I personally grew up with Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets myself. Hell, I've probably played this game like 15 times, most of those times being back in the day when I was just obsessed with the game. The first 3 games are pretty good, regardless of which version you're playing, although it does take a notable downturn as soon as you get into the Goblet of Fire game, which is just about one of the most boring and low effort video game adaptations I've ever played personally. But oh well, maybe we'll stream some of them someday. Dust Dumbledore. So this one's a little weird. This topic is about the strange trap set up by Moody in 12 Grimmauld Place that was intended for Snape, which would disperse on saying the word kill. Crystal Conspiracy notes that they included this because it's super weird and nobody talks about it, especially for how ineffective it is as a trap. So yeah, I never really thought about this random elements, but it is definitely pretty weird. Pottermore. Pottermore is the now defunct website that was a virtual recreation of the wizard world in the books, and contained a bunch of extra information that came out after the last book, and it was later replaced by the now Wizarding World website. It was also the first place where you could take a little quiz to see which of the 4 houses that you'd be sorted into. And in case you're wondering, I was sorted into Slytherin, of course. See y'all in the dungeon. My Immortal. So I actually made a whole video about this topic on my channel that you can check out here for more details. There are some parts that are a little dated, like one of the people that could have been an author of the story has since come out as definitely not an author. But nonetheless, the TLDR version of what the actual story of My Immortal is that it's an infamously badly written fanfiction that's centered around Ebony Darkness Dementia Ravenway, a gothic vampire at Hogwarts who is in a love triangle between Draco Malfoy, who is also super goth, and Harry Potter, who is now randomly a vampire. And the 3 of them all go off into like a good Charlotte concert and an MCR concert like 2 times or something like that. And yeah, it's hard to fully put into words what the story is about outside of that, since its plot is really all over the place and jumps from random thing to random thing, random plot point to random plot point. It really starts to feel like you're going nuts or that you're in some kind of fever dream about halfway through it. There's also a lot of mystery over who wrote the fanfiction and if it was done by a troll or someone with this little understanding of the English language. My own thoughts is that it was not a troll, and that we have most likely and never will actually know the real author. But all the same, it's one of the greats of our time. Dobby Beard. So in the Star Ace 6-scale series, which are these series of toy figures centered around Harry Potter, which came out all the way after all the movies and books had already come out, Dobby for some inexplicable reason has a little goatee, as seen here. He also has a little goatee in the poster of Chamber of Secrets apparently as well. And since we never really get a good look at Dobby's chin in most of the material, like most of the on-screen time, many argue if Dobby is meant to have a little beard or not. If it was meant to always be there and was taken away in most depictions of it, or if it's always been there, we've just never noticed. Beetle the Bard. The Tales of Beetle the Bard appeared in Deathly Hallows and was its own book you could buy at some point, with some extra stories that were included. It's essentially a set of fairy tales from the wizarding world. Satanic Panic. Harry Potter was subject to the Satanic Panic movement around the late 90s and early 2000s, since it has to do with magic and wizards and witches and what have you. It's quite silly to imagine such nice books with Christian themes and even values, and general themes of good versus evil, etc., being considered satanic or, I guess, evil in any real sense. Almost no one thinks of these books that way these days, of course, but in much the same way people who claim to be fighting racism try to ban To Kill a Mockingbird, it's obvious someone forgot to read the book that they were trying to ban. Plus, banning books is just cringe anyway, no matter the reason given. But I digress. Mafalda. Mafalda is a character who is meant to appear in book 4 of the series, and work as a sort of rival to Hermione. However, she ended up being cut for various reasons, one of them probably being that book 4 was already packed enough, but also that a lot of her character was moved into the character of Reader Skeeter instead. I could be off base here, but when I think rival to Hermione, I think this Mafalda probably would have been kind of a know-it-all and tried to beat her to have the best 100 score grades or what have you. Seems like it would have been interesting, but I can very much understand why it was taken out. Again, considering how jam-packed book 4 is as it is. Jewish stars at Gringotts. The Star of David can be found on the floor pattern of Gringotts Bank, and many people have pointed to this, as well as the depiction of the goblins who hoard gold, have long noses, control the world's banks, are disloyal, as well as various other things, to all be a big anti-Semitic metaphor or joke, I guess. This idea that the goblins are supposed to be an anti-Semitic depiction of Jewish people has only grown more and more with all the controversy that already surrounds J.K. Rowling. But I'll be honest, this one seems very unintentional. In fact, this whole thing kind of reminds me of the controversy and stupid debate people have over getting upset at orcs being evil in fantasy fiction because they say they represent African Americans. What exactly made you think of people of color when you saw the big mean green monster race who relishes in warfare and sometimes works for the world's literal Satan/Dark Lord, are often tribal, mindless brutes, and relish in torturing and eating other races at times? I know Jewish people aren't the first thing that I think of when I look at these goblins, and maybe if you see races of people and weird monster people in fiction, that says more about you than the actual intent of the book. Wizarding World Gold. This is a premium membership offered by Wizarding World that costs $75 for 12 months. It's kind of a shit deal that you don't get very much for $75 that would later evolve into the Harry Potter fan club. This is just the new name for the Wizarding World Gold, and it still offers all the same features as the original program, which is to say not much outside of some pins, I guess. Aberforth fucks goats. So this is a theory about Dumbledore's brother that stems off of this quote from the book by Albus Dumbledore himself. Quote, "My own brother, Aberforth, was prosecuted for practicing inappropriate charms on a goat. It was all over the papers. But did Aberforth hide? No, he did not. He held his head high and went about his business as usual. Of course, I'm not entirely sure that he can read, so that may not have been bravery." Unquote. Now this could easily be seen this way, but it could also be that he's using charms to make goats fly up in the air, shoot lightning at them, change their colors, force them to dance, and all sorts of other charms that he could have been doing. My mind doesn't immediately go to porking a goat with magic, but sure, I guess it's a possibility. Here we are, Hogwarts at last, across the Great Lake and into the main hall, full of all assortment of treats and drink. Come, let's take a seat and take in the atmosphere, watch all the other students be sorted into their houses. Oh, and I guess we'll listen to Dumbledore go on about, what was it, Lord Baltimore, something like that. Pillars of Storage. This is one of the most famous leaked titles for Book 6. Apparently, even J.K. Rowling has a love-hate proclivity for it, as she actually referenced it on her own official website. Pillars of storage sounds like an interesting way of describing the room of requirement, which is basically just a room full of storage, lost items, etc. And that does line up with some major plot points of the 6th book, but yeah, the Half-Blood Prince sounds a lot more cool. Dobby's Grave Defiled. After the final movie, Deathly Hallows, wrapped up filming, a grave was erected on the spot where it was filmed, and I'm assuming it's the one seen within the film itself. Well, it appears a particularly rude Harry Potter fan came and stole the gravestone from the last resting place of Dobby, and of course never returned it. Since then though, there has been lots of replacement stones placed in its place, so all can mourn over the brave little free house elf. 30H. This, like My Immortal, is another fanfiction that has apparently gotten pretty infamous over the years. But instead of gothic vampires, we have groin saws and demonic astronauts in the very first sentence, no less. Instead of MCR, we get Fuck Slayer, a guitar from a dimension where all screamed for naught, wrought from the silver heart of heaven's false promise, laced with the vessels that pulsed with angels' menstrual blood, hewn from the horns of Satan's generals, which, yes, is actually a direct quote describing the guitar, by the way. Did I mention that this one was written by an edgy teenage boy, while the other was written by an edgy teenage girl? For this reason, many people consider it to be the exact polar opposite, or like alternate universe version of My Immortal. It's one of the strangest fanfics that I've ever read, and it's also pretty damn short too. I'd recommend it if you're interested in so bad it's good fanfiction, but you've already read My Immortal by this point. Bonus entry. So while we're here on the topic of fanfictions, I wanted to point to what many consider to be one of the best, or at least most interesting Harry Potter fanfics ever written, that being Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, written by Eliezer Shlomo Yudkowsky. Sorry for butchering that. All the same, this fanfiction adapts the story of Harry Potter to explain complex concepts in cognitive science, philosophy, and the scientific method, which sounds pretty crazy, but it doesn't stop there. This story has an alternate start where instead of Harry living under the mean and spiteful Uncle Vernon, instead his aunt married an Oxford professor who homeschools Harry in science and rational thinking and what have you. This, as you might imagine, gives Harry a very different outlook on life, especially when he is told that he is a wizard and finds out about the world of magic, which to him seems to go against all the ideas that he had been taught up to that point. It's an interesting character study in this case and shows how different many of Harry's choices are because of this change in surroundings as a child. There are other changes and twists, and of course how the blending of rationality, science, and magic all kind of interconnect and weave, but all the same, I just wanted to point it out as one of the more popular and widely considered good fanfictions here as well. Shipping Wars. So, if you've been a part of any fandom long enough, you'll surely become very familiar with shipping wars. That is to say, fans fighting about which character should be with which other character. The shipping wars on the Harry Potter fandom got news coverage while the books were in production apparently as well, so it got pretty heated. Shipping wars can be harmless fun between fans that are passionate about a series, but it oftentimes never fucking is, especially recently, since some fans will insist on trying to prove why they're the better fan and why their ship is less harmful and problematic than another ship, thus attacking the literal integrity and ethics of the other fan for liking Harry Potter with Hermione than say Ginny or Draco Malfoy, etc. As an example, many people who ship Harry with Hermione say it's better chemistry and relationship and less toxic than Hermione being with Ron, which is the canonical pairing. There's also a lot of people that like to pair Draco with Hermione as well. And many people consider that to be a toxic relationship, and that either Harry or Ron would be better than that. And then there are also people who like to pair Harry with Draco Malfoy. And yeah, that's just kind of a completely different rule set at that point. In the end though, it's just a bunch of nerds getting way too heated over fictional characters' relationships. Wizard military. There is no actual wizard military in the world of Harry Potter, with the closest thing to them being the Aurors that work for the Ministry of Magic. Although I suppose they are more like police/investigators. Well, them and Dementors. But yeah, in fact, it's usually seen as suspicious for large groups or small armies of wizards to come together, such as the Order of the Phoenix or Dumbledore's army, or of course Voldemort's Death Eaters, which is pretty interesting. Then again, I suppose everyone in the wizarding world has wands at their disposal that can literally act as a one-man army all by themselves. Everyone has the right to bear wands, so I suppose a small few can act as a military in of themselves if they wanted to. I suppose there wouldn't really be a need for an army at that point. J.K. Rowling's old website. Before Pottermore and the wizarding world, J.K. Rowling had an old website that ran on Flash that updated readers about the goings-on of her novels. Harry Potter Lego originally based off the books. As Crystal Conspiracy notes, in the movie, a harp is used to put the three-headed dog Fluffy to sleep, whereas in the original Lego set, it was a flute, which was what was used in the book. Additionally, other details like Voldemort's eyes being depicted as red in that era's set, which was how they were described within the books, also gives credence to the idea that the Lego sets were based on the books, which is pretty cool. Lethofold. In the book Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them, a creature was first introduced called a lethifold, which is described as a murderous living blanket that would smother its victim and could be defeated by using a Patronus. That's basically it though. They never seem to appear anywhere outside of their mention in this book. Harry Potter and the Leopard Walk Up to the Dragon. So this is the title of a Chinese knockoff of Harry Potter that appeared sometime around or before the release of the fourth novel. From what I've read and the summaries I've found about this book, it apparently sees Harry Potter getting caught in a sweet and sour rain, which turns Harry into a fat, hairy dwarf. He has to go back to his original form and get his magical powers back, so he teams up with an old wizard named Gandalf to find a mystical ring and fight a dragon. And is this starting to sound familiar to you? Yeah, it's not only a Harry Potter ripoff, it's also a Hobbit ripoff. As a matter of fact, it's mostly a Hobbit ripoff, just randomly inserting Harry Potter into it for some reason. Oh, and in case you're wondering, there's actually a ton of these ripoffs out there, with some select titles being Harry Potter and the Big Funnel, Tanya Grotter and the Magical Double Bass, Harry Potter in Calcutta, Pori Gotter and the Stone Philosopher, and of course Harry Potter and the Half-Blooded Relative Prince. Most of these ripoffs come from China, but others stem from India, Russia, and all sorts of places. Oh, and while it's a spoof and not exactly a ripoff, you also cannot forget Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone. Ah, yes. After a nice feast, it's time to head to the common rooms for some nice chats with our fellow students. And I sit by the fire with a good book in hand. Oh, we mustn't forget a good night's rest. But you and me are night owls, aren't we? We couldn't end our first night here at Hogwarts just going to sleep. Then again, we can't exactly sneak out until others have fallen asleep. Wouldn't want any tattletales after all. Let's just hang out here for a bit. There seems to be an ad break playing in the fire after all. Book 7 is fake. So this one alludes to when Deathly Hallows was actually completely leaked online with only minor differences from the final published version, and how the fanbase and internet at large reacted to it, which was mostly disbelief. Almost everyone had apparently dismissed it as fake at the time. Now bear in mind, there's a little bit of context to this here, that there were several leaked versions of the final book that came out in the time when the novel was being written. It was big shit back at the time, and a lot of people were waiting for it. So there were several supposed leaked versions of that book, like entire portions of the book or entire books that would come out that were completely fake, but people acted as though they were the leaked finale to the Harry Potter saga. I actually remember reading the summaries of some of these back in the day in my anticipation for the final book, and thusly most people assumed that this leaked book was yet another fake, as most had grown quite cynical at this point to any book leaks at all. Which, speaking of, the Seventh Horcrux. This is the title of yet another fanfiction that is often mistaken for an early leak of the last book, as it happens to share many of the same story beats as the final book. Makes me wonder if part of why people thought Deathly Hallows, the leak, was fake was because the Seventh Horcrux had already existed. I don't know the exact timeline of these things, but it would make a lot of sense if a lot of people knew about the Seventh Horcrux fanfiction and then reading the Deathly Hallows saw a bunch of similar plot beats and assumed someone had just copied that fanfiction onto that. Harry Potter and the School of Magic. Most people probably are aware that the first book, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, was renamed to Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone here in the USA, because they apparently didn't think that we would know what the Philosopher's Stone is, even though it's like a mythological thing and they literally say what it is in the book. But at any rate, originally they were going to go with a much more basic bitch title than even that being Harry Potter and the School of Magic. Book 4, Air, Fire, Water, and Earth. So the Triwizard Tournament, which is the main event going on within the Goblet of Fire novel, which has 3 trials, one involving dragons, one involving being underwater for 1 hour, and one involving a seemingly endless maze, had originally had 4 trials, being themed after the 4 elements. However, J.K. Rowling struggled to come up with a unique one for air, so she combined it with fire to make the dragon trial. That was probably for the best, but it does make me think about what the air trial would have looked like if she followed through with it. Maybe they all would have had to find a way to fly without brooms up to a tower or something like that. Or fuck it, maybe they just do some sort of extreme version of Quidditch. Actually, now I'm thinking about it, considering 3 of the contestants are exceptionally good on a broom and have won several Quidditch games, one of them being like an all-star, it does seem sort of strange that the obvious choice to do some sort of Quidditch-based trial wasn't used. Oh well. 3-hour cut of Phoenix. There exists a 3-hour cut of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix that has never been released, and only small bits of it have ever been shown. Many take issue with how different this movie is from the book and would like to see the 3-hour cut, as the hope is some of their issues of the things cut out of the book may appear. Now, me personally, I would love to see the 3-hour cut, but mainly because, bit of a hot take here, Order of the Phoenix is one of my personal favorite of all the film adaptations. And considering how long that book is, I felt a lot of the core ideas and themes were there. But that's just me though. All the same, I would love to see the 3-hour cut, if only to see what exactly was cut away. Hoodie Voldemort. During a scene in the Order of the Phoenix movie, Voldemort is seen in a hoodie similar to Harry's, which while rather goofy looking, I think is shown it to visually showcase the two's connection, as well as make Harry reflect upon who he could become, what destiny seems to want him to become in a sense. but that's just my take on it. All the same, it is still pretty silly looking. Dementor Come is fog. So in the opening chapter of book 6, Dementors are said to be breeding, and that the heavy fog is part of the aftermath of that, which is interesting since fog is something that they seem to always be emanating around them. So yeah, I'll just leave you with that. Video game lore. Many of the Harry Potter video games, which there are a lot of, have characters that only appear in the games, but show up across all versions and all entries of said games, as well as having several exclusive spells that again stay consistent. The most popular of which, without a doubt, being Flipendo. Which I remember being stuck in my brain as a kid as the go-to spell for defense, and was always disappointed when Harry didn't fucking use Flipendo in any of the movies or the books. Florian Fortescue's cut subplot. Ice cream parlor owner Florian Fortescue was apparently supposed to have a much bigger role in the Deathly Hallows. He was originally supposed to be kidnapped and saved by Harry, Hermione, and Ron, then given them clues to the Elder Wand and the Ravenclaw diadem, which, okay, sure, random place to get that info, but alright. However, Rowling ended up cutting the scene because in her words, it was going nowhere. So yeah, cults. So apparently there are several real-life cults connected to the Harry Potter franchise. One of which being the Snape Wives, which according to fanlore.com is described as follows. Quote, the Snape Wives, also known as Snapeists, are women in the Harry Potter fandom who believe that they channel Severus Snape. That is to say, they allow his spirit to inhabit their bodies and speak to him, and engaged in romantic relationships with him, and see him as a vital spiritual guide for their daily lives. They practice Snapeism, a quasi-religion centered on Snape. They believe Severus Snape is not simply a character in the Harry Potter books, but is an omniscient and immortal deity, and in fact, believe that the books were written because J.K. Rowling was channeling Snape. Snape Wives were active mostly in 2006, and their communities were primarily on livejournal.com. They have since deleted all their web pages and forums though, due to mockery from outside their community, and the community apparently faded soon after, unquote. So yeah, that is certainly something, but if you can believe it or not, it actually gets a whole lot crazier than that. Andy Blake, aka Vanfiction, is a fan writer and fan artist best known for his involvement in a number of high-profile fandom controversies. Once again, according to fanlore.com, quote, Blake is notorious for being the center of incidents which include starting a cult in the Lord of the Rings fandom, another cult in the Harry Potter fandom, failed convention organizing, his many fraudulent identities and pseudonyms, faking the deaths of both his real and fabricated identities, and being witness to the homicide of his roommate/cult members. While he had previous pseudonyms in the late 1990s, two of them being Voyager Babe and Star Trek writer, he's most known for joining the Lord of the Rings fandom in the early 2000s as Victoria Bitter. Vanfiction's best known fanfic is the Harry Potter epic Dumbledore's Army and the Year of Darkness, which has spawned an extensive shared universe called the Dadeverse and a cult, unquote. So there is a lot to unpack with fanfiction, and while I could spend a while going over it all, I will give you some of the broad strokes just because this is exceptionally strange, and I kind of just feel like I have to go on this tangent. Blake essentially created a Yahoo fan group in 2002 centered around Lord of the Rings, and over time convinced people that he could channel characters from the books and that this was even their true purpose, and that he had the ability to see others' potential to channel these characters and actors as well. Think the Final Fantasy house if you're familiar, but Lord of the Rings flavored. Blake eventually moved to Oregon and formed and led a group centered on these spiritual beliefs that many, including former members, call a cult. The group called itself the Baganders. From here, lots of abuse happened, everything from physical abuse on his followers, convincing them to call him supreme commander and fearless leader, convincing others to cut ties with their families, you know, the typical god complex of a cult sort of shithead activities. While I'm skipping ahead here, eventually the group did fall apart, and a book was even made about a fake charity run that the group, or I should say Blake, tried to pull off, as well as Blake having faked no longer existing attempts more than a few times as a means of manipulation and hiding his true identity. He also changed his name several times, as well as claimed his soul had died and that he was now fully channeling the soul of some actor in the Lord of the Rings films. One of the more prominent names he went by that many in the cult knew him by was Jordan Wood. Eventually though, after this cult fell through, Blake wanted to try it again, and as fanlore.com puts it, quote, in 2008, Blake reappeared in the Harry Potter fandom under a new identity of fanfiction, writing the epic fanfic Dumbledore's Army in the Year of Darkness. Dead gained a large following and spawned an extensive shared universe called the Dadeverse. As fanfiction, Blake claimed to be an Irish genius and to have fought in militias during the Troubles, that a woman that he loved named Louise had abandoned him and taken their son, as well as claiming to have a heart condition and a short time to live, using this to convince fans to give him money to visit them. Through this manipulation, Blake built a second cult around Dade and his so-called channeling abilities, now known as the Hellmouth, with followers known as Dadens. He exerted a great deal of influence over some fans' lives, playing matchmaker and even trying to pair off an underage girl with an adult man in another country as one of his atrocities. When Blake began to plan a Dade Con, that is to say a convention for all these followers and fans to group up, Abby Stone revealed that she knew fanfiction as the person formerly known as Jordan Wood, again when he had that Lord of the Rings cult, to warn people about Blake's previous cult. This did not stop DadeCon from ensuing, however, in December of 2008. Shortly after the convention, Blake and Dadian Brittany Quinn claimed to be fighting a psychic battle with an undead shaman wizard. Blake would later make a statement that he was leaving the fandom, but ultimately didn't end up doing that. Then, on May 7th, 2011, Brittany Quinn and another roommate were shot and killed by her ex-husband, who then Blake, who had been living with Brittany for almost a year, was also shot during the attack, but did not die. 9 days later, Blake posted about Brittany to the Dadeverse Facebook community and announced that a 2-month hike around New Zealand that he'd been planning would now go on in Brittany's memory, a move that was highly criticized and exploitative. He moved in with a few other Dadens who were reportedly abused in the same manner as those in Blake's Lord of the Rings cult, suffering severe health consequences on Blake's so-called hike, unquote. Eventually, people who knew of this man's evil started compiling evidence and his online history as not only to expose him for who he was, but also as a warning to everyone that this man was dangerous. I could go on, and honestly I skipped a lot of details because of how crazy this man's history online is. I mean, he has since tried to do this cult thing a few more times. In particular, he tried to use the supernatural fandom as a means of building a cult as well. But maybe those stories are best saved for another time. All the same, Blake is an incredibly manipulative and evil individual that should be avoided at all costs. Uncle Vernon's magic-killing sperm. Moving on to something a little less heavy and serious, so Rowling had considered giving Dudley a muggle-born wizard child for the epilogue of the final book, but decided that, quote, no wizarding traits would ever survive contact with Uncle Vernon's DNA, unquote. Which, I mean, yeah, I guess so then. Man, I just can't get to sleep. I mean, I normally can't anyway, but not with all this talk of cults and shit. You know what we should do? We should sneak into the restricted section of the library. find us some interesting stories. Oh, don't worry about sneaking around the castle at night. We're going to be using a spell that no wizard knows. Editing. There we are. Now, just keep your voice down. We don't need old Filch or any of the prefects finding us here after all. Wouldn't want locomotor mortis cast on us now, do we? Then let's begin. Hermione is a self-insert. J.K. Rowling has admitted in the past that Hermione is based off of herself when she was younger. Simple as that. J.K. Rowling's tree houses. J.K. Rowling owns 2 tree houses, both of which are 2 stories tall and feature spiral staircases. And that's pretty much it. Jack Sloper. This is a character who is a student at Hogwarts who gives a letter to Harry from Dumbledore. Many fans have asked the question of why Dumbledore trusts this random character, or hell, who is he as a whole? It seems to be a mystery that has begun fascinating quite a few readers as of late. But there doesn't appear to be any concrete answers to it though. Early draft material. So this one's actually super cool. In the earliest drafts of the first chapter of the first book, the Potters lived on an island, and Hermione's family, living on the mainland, saw an explosion out at sea and discovered the bodies of Harry's parents. In this version of the story, Hermione's father was the one who pulled Harry out of the wreckage of his parents' house. I love hearing about stuff like this because it makes my mind buzz with how different the story would have been with this opener, and what it would mean for the rest of the series. Would Harry have grown up alongside Hermione? Would they have gone to Hogwarts together? What about Ron or Hagrid? Or would he have ended up with his aunt and uncle anyway, and maybe the Hermione's family bit would be more of a twist later on for the first book or even a later book at some point? I do ultimately prefer the story in the opener that we got with the book instead, but as a writer and someone who has changed the opening chapter to my own book series quite a few times in the past, my mind buzzes with all the changes that would happen after this initial opening. Alistair and the Broken Toy Soldiers. So this one's also pretty interesting as well. In one of the early versions of the first movie, Harry was supposed to have a sort of sounding board in the form of a spider named Alistair and a bunch of broken toy soldiers, which I suppose were meant to be an outlet for him to express his thoughts and feelings, etc. You can see small remnants of this idea in Harry playing with his toy soldiers in the film, but yeah, I could totally see this being a scene in the first movie. Mouse Hat. This refers to this strange depiction of Harry from the cover of the Italian version of the first book, where he is seen with a mouse hat. Actually, I should note that there is entire leagues of difference between regions' book covers for this particular series. I always love ours, of course, because it's what I grew up with, but it's super interesting to see how each country had their own style to the covers of the Harry Potter books, and how much of a completely different feel to the entire series it can give it sometimes. Like our first version of the first book, we see Harry trying to capture a golden snitch. While over in the Bloomsbury UK edition, we see Harry being run the fuck over by the Hogwarts Express. But also, then there's the Bloomsbury adult edition of the novel, in which we just see the Philosopher's Stone. You wouldn't want people to know that you're reading fucking Harry Potter after all. What are you, some kind of fucking degenerate? Adults don't fucking read books with characters on the front of them. Fucking disgusting. The title, the author, and maybe, just maybe, an object. But then you have other countries, like the Chinese edition, which decides to have Fluffy on full display as if it were some sort of main character in the book or something. Then you have the caricature-like style of the Finnish edition, the chalky art style of the Japanese versions, this anime-looking ass Thai edition, which actually, those are some really cool covers. I wish we had those. And this, very interesting Bulgarian edition. It's honestly lots of fun looking at the different covers and thinking about why each country's publisher decided on that particular style or moment in the book to focus on. Like, not to pick on the Bulgarian covers again, but when most of the covers for Order of the Phoenix center around like a phoenix or Harry riding on a thestral, or Harry looking like he's up to no fucking good in a blue room. The Bulgarian cover is that time Harry and Hermione are like next to the giant, and I guess the Centaurs shoot at him. Okay. Then again, you have the Half-Blood Prince covers, which by and large are some of the fucking most cool and epic covers, usually featuring Harry and Dumbledore doing something cool with the Horcrux, or like the parting of fire flames, or fighting the zombie things. Although you do have the Danish cover, which is technically still that scene, but kind of looks like the cover to an exploitation cannibal movie. This shit gave some Danish kids some nightmares, is all I'm saying. Also, gotta love the way the German edition has Harry, which by the way has some really weird hair here, looking at me with this fucking smug look on his face. Like he knows something and I don't. Dork, you reading this shit? You fucking reading Harry Potter right now? Anyway, if you want to explore the depths of the Harry Potter covers, then I'd recommend you go check out the Harry Potter Fanzone's comprehensive list of all the covers from all the regions and editions. Curse of Nagini. This was one of the original trademark names for the last book by Warner Brothers. That's pretty much it. Wicked Ban at Hogwarts. J.K. Rowling has noted that Wiccans have a completely different understanding of magic that isn't real, and that would negate them being able to visit the wizarding world. In other words, they aren't allowed at Hogwarts, and what have you. Some say that this is a reaction to dispel any fear around the books during the Satanic Panic. But either way, it does bring up an interesting dynamic with the series, and how faith and religion might connect or disconnect with its world in ways that certainly aren't explored within the novels. I mean, as much as the Christian themes are there throughout all the novels, you never really hear Christianity or faith brought up all that much, if at all, in the novels. Nor any other religion for that matter. Not that it really matters that much at all, but it is interesting food for thought all the same. Real life Ron. Ron Weasley is based on Sean Harris, one of J.K. Rowling's best friends when she was younger. Apparently there was a documentary where it shows the two of them reuniting after all these years, but I wasn't able to find it available to watch anywhere. But according to Crystal Conspiracy, it was a fairly awkward reunion. Film peeves. So anyone who's read the books will know very well that one of the more prominent characters that was completely cut from all film adaptations was Peeves the Trickster Ghost. Well, originally he was going to be included within the first film. Rick Mayall was cast and apparently went as far as filming scenes before the character was cut. However, none of the footage has ever surfaced. The reason for this cut was at first due to director Chris Columbus hating the design of Peeves and planned on cutting him from the film as soon as the scenes were shot, with the original intent being that he was going to fix him in post for a future special edition of the film on DVD. He also made it into the Chamber of Secrets as an all CGI effect, but once again it just fell through unfortunately, and thus Peeves never made it into any of the other movies. He does, however, appear in the games. Encyclopedia of Potter World / Scottish book. This was meant to be a book that would come out shortly after the last novel, and include stuff J.K. Rowling wasn't able to fit into the novels, as well as just generally build up the world and lore of Harry Potter. This, however, ended up becoming the foundation for the site Pottermore instead. Well, that was fun. According to this nifty book that just screamed in my face, there's more secrets to be found in the Dark Forest. So away we go. There we go. Now let's skulk around for a bit, shall we? Michael Jackson musical. At one point, Michael Jackson wanted to do a Harry Potter musical, but J.K. Rowling refused the offer mainly because he was American, and she wanted to keep the product and series British, which, speaking of, Nintendo purchased denial. So I'd never heard of this one until this iceberg, but Nintendo was one of the many companies that wanted to buy the rights to the Harry Potter IP, intending to use it for a series of video games. There's even some concept art drawn up for this pitch, which you can see here. There was apparently 2 games pitched, with the main one being a third-person adventure title, while the smaller team worked on a potential game based around Quidditch. J.K. Rowling, however, went with Warner Brothers instead, so the games never came to be. Killing Ron. J.K. Rowling considered killing one of the main 3 characters, mainly Ron, in the halfway point of the series. This of course never came to be, and even the ones that she did end up killing, she has expressed deep regret in doing, such as Fred, who she actually apologized to the fans for killing off. Robbie Coltrane was mad behind the scenes of the Chamber of Secrets. Robbie Coltrane, the actor who portrayed the lovable Hagrid, acts passive-aggressive in the behind-the-scenes extras of the DVD of this movie. He notes that Hagrid has barely any screen time in the film and seems rather peeved about it. Some have even asserted that the reason the movie ends on the entirety of Hogwarts giving a round of applause to Hagrid when he returns may be because of this behind-the-scenes drama. However, I'd say this is unlikely in that it just ends the movie off in a satisfying way, but I suppose anything is possible. I'll stand by you always. Bruce Springsteen wrote a song intended for the first movie and was even filed with the Copyright Office. But J.K. Rowling did not want any licensed music to be used for the films, and so it went unused until it was used for the film Blinded by the Light. It's actually quite a nice song, and while I totally respect the decision to not use licensed music in the films as to not age them, this song fits the atmosphere of the first Harry Potter film quite nicely, and I can so easily see an alternate universe where this song plays it during the credits of the film. If you're a longtime fan of Harry Potter and you've never listened to this song, I'd recommend going and giving it a listen. And imagine what might have been. Steven Spielberg proposal. It seems this tier is dedicated to deals and proposals that never went anywhere with the franchise. This one in particular being quite interesting. Steven Spielberg had plans to be the director of the first Harry Potter film. He would have made it a CGI movie and had adapted multiple books in one go, which by the sounds of it, sounds pretty bad to be honest. But nonetheless, Spielberg was taken off the project for insisting that Harry be played by Haley Joel Osment, though he now looks back at the project as something that would have been a slam dunk for him. So it's clear he had a pretty clear vision, I guess. I'd love to see the script form of what that movie was going to be, but yeah, I'm ultimately glad it didn't happen. It never ever works out when a movie is adapting multiple books into one movie. You can just feel all those pages being fucking crushed within that screen time. Abandoned book titles. Most of the books in the series had several working titles, trademarked before being finalized and published. Some notable examples being, Goblet of Fire was once Harry Potter and the Chariots of Light, Harry Potter and the Pyramids of Fermat, and Harry Potter and the Alchemist's Cell, which obviously none of them make any sense except Goblet of Fire, so it makes me wonder what the events of Harry Potter and the Pyramids of Fermat would have followed. Wow, so many broken deals and ideas lost to the remnants of time. Really makes you think, doesn't it? Say, I know where we should go next. The Room of Requirements. I bet there's lots of obscure facts hidden in there, but I don't think my editing magic can help us here. What with us having to require to have it open and all its strange magical rules? Come on, let's just sneak into the castle and find it. Don't worry, the ad will keep you safe while we get there. Christmas album. So this refers to the A Magical Time of Year album, which features actors from the Harry Potter and Fantastic Beasts singing Christmas songs. Not much more to say about this than that, I suppose. I gave it a quick listen and yeah, it's alright, it's okay. It is overall pretty unremarkable though, at least to me, besides the fact that this thing must have just dropped and never got advertised, because I've never heard of it and it has almost no views on YouTube or Spotify. So I'm guessing not many people know about this. Fat Cops. Speaking of music not many people know about, J.K. Rowling's husband is part of a band called Fat Cops, which, again, seems extremely obscure. I think their official YouTube channel has less than 200 subs as of writing this, although it only has one music video, and I saw another music video of theirs on a different channel, so I don't know, but none of them have very high views, and I, in fact, don't even see any comments down below them saying, you know, J.K. Rowling's husband or something like that. So it seems like this is also pretty, unknown information. Book 4 was going to be the first split movie. With as long as the books start to get by the 4th novel in the series, Warner Bros. Was already considering cutting the movies in 2 to tell the stories as accurately as possible. This obviously never happened up until the final book, which was split in 2. I can more than see why they wanted to do that. I mean, Order of the Phoenix is actually the longest book in the franchise, but I think it also would have made it excessively hard splitting a school year story in half without it feeling very jarring. They kind of lucked out with the last book, as it's broken up in such a way that made it strangely perfect for splitting into 2 movies. But all the same, it's interesting trying to imagine what they would have been like if they had been split in 2. What details would we have gotten that was left on the cutting room floor by it being 1 movie instead of 2? Extended Bellatrix Hermione torture scene. So in the 7th film, near its finale, there is a scene where Bellatrix Lestrange tortures Hermione with a knife for a period of time while Harry and Ron try to get out of their cell to help her. In the actual film, this moment is only shown very briefly, but apparently Emma Watson researched how to do a torture scene quite a bit beforehand and took it very seriously. It's reported that she gave such a great performance that director Yates let the camera run for 5 minutes straight without yelling cut, filming far and beyond where the scene was intended to end. This cut of the scene has never been released though, even with Emma saying how intense and how many boundaries it crossed for her as an actress. Proud of it she seems to be in general. It sounds like something almost on the verge of a weird fetishy creepypasta, but is 100% real. There are even several articles where Emma Watson says that to get into character more, her and Helena Bonham, the actress who plays Bellatrix, were screaming constantly back and forth with each other, to the point where Helena actually apologized multiple times to Emma because she felt it was just going too far. There are even rumors that the reason that so little of that scene is showcased within the movie is to keep it from getting an R rating. But either way, we will more than likely never see what the full 5 minutes consisted of. The Womb of Requirement. This one's notable for having "do not research" next to it. So how bad could it be? Well, it's apparently a fanfiction by Hank Green, otherwise known as This Guy, who's on Crash Course, the brother of John Green, who's the author of All the Fault in Our Stars, and one part of the Vlogbrothers. The Womb of Requirement is about a Victorian teenage mom who gives birth at Hogwarts in the Room of Requirement, thus the Womb of Requirement. Now, from what I've gathered, this was handed out to people via a donation drive of sorts, and I can't seem to find it anywhere online to read, so we'll just have to use our imaginations for now. If you do happen to know a place where it can be read, or you just happen to know what the contents of this fanfiction is, then let me know down in the comments below. It sounds super weird and kind of gross, so I don't know if it's do not research because it actually is, or it's do not research because it's like a joke. It's kind of hard to tell. Harry Potter in the Sacred Text. This is the name of a podcast reinterpreting Harry Potter as scripture. Now, that sounded slightly interesting to me, so I decided to give part of an episode a listen, and I must say, it's exceptionally strange. I suppose there is some deeper analysis in there, here and there, but overall, it's a lot more of a podcast about two hosts relating themselves to the story of the chapters, as well as kind of having this strange, optimistic tone during the whole thing. It's just kind of like, if it's not weird, it's just kind of boring, if I'm being totally honest. But yeah, it's not at all what I would have imagined based on the premise. As Crystal Conspiracy points out, the person behind the podcast also owns a firm called Sacred Design Firm, which has a rather odd website that seems to be centered around new age stuff and other vague ideas and things to look at. I might look a little bit more into this one. I'm not sure if there's anything more to this than what's on the surface, but yeah, pretty interesting. Harry Potter at Home Behind the Scenes Trouble. An initiative called Harry Potter at Home was created in response to the COVID outbreak, allowing teachers to, for a limited time, read the Harry Potter books to their students as part of a virtual class, which, is a fun gesture. Additionally, an audiobook read by different celebrities that were part of the Harry Potter franchise was created before suddenly being paused midway due to J.K. Rowling expressing her opinions about trans people. So it was all sort of short-lived and fell apart. Wow, that was interesting. Oh shit, I didn't even do that. I mean, I was probably going to dramatically lead us into coming to the Chamber of Secrets eventually. I guess someone or something wants us here right now. Let's explore and find out why, No need. I have summoned you both here to impart my factual information about the Harry Potter franchise, the dark studies, the theories of old and new that only I, Lord Voldemort, can know. Oh, well, that's convenient. I guess I don't have to read. Here is my diary. Read its lore and see the truth about this franchise that overly demonizes those who want a world where I am God. Oh, alright then, I guess we'll be doing some more reading then. It can be so hard being me, I'm so tired of people comparing me to random politicians from the Muggle world. I am far more powerful than any of them. My diary holds the truth about the wizarding world. Go on, read it, owl. Alright, let's see what crazy secrets are held within your diary. Harry Potter is gay. So this one's kind of funny. Since the books are all told through Harry Potter's perspective, there might have been a slight misstep from J.K. Rowling, as she always describes men as attractive and handsome, whereas female characters tend to have much more bland descriptions. This can make it come off as if Harry Potter himself is gay, but is of course unintentional since the books are being written by a woman. Didn't stop anyone from shipping Harry Potter with Draco Malfoy though. Ron is Dumbledore. So this one needs some explaining. So the theory goes that Albus Dumbledore is actually a time-traveling Ron Weasley. This theory is based on physical similarities between the two characters and small plot points in the books. The theory suggests that there is an alternate reality where Voldemort is not defeated and an old Ron Weasley is forced to travel back in time to assume the character of Albus Dumbledore to guide himself and other students into victory over the Dark Lord. Both Dumbledore and Weasley have long fingers, share a left leg injury, like chocolate frog cards, and naturally have red hair. It's also argued that Dumbledore had to have grown up in the same generation as Weasley due to a comment about eating Bertie Bott's of every flavor beans in his youth, and Bertie Bott's not being born in time to even make his product yet for that to have happened. There's also the fact that Dumbledore seemed to know everything that Harry and his friends are going to do before they even carried out their mischievous plans. There's more to the theory, but ultimately the final book sort of disproves the entire thing, with both characters getting more backstory which does not line up at all. Plus, J.K. Rowling has also officially disproven it. But all the same, it is an interesting theory though. But speaking of Dumbledore, Dumbledore is evil. Dumbledore is revealed to be rather manipulative in in later books, with many characters seemingly being played as pawns for a far greater game controlled by him, which has made many question the ethics of the wise wizard. Many would argue that he uses Lily's death to control Snape, or that he uses Harry as a lamb for slaughter, for the right moment of course, and holds a lot of power in the wizarding world at large. There's also claims of how he treated his family in his pursuit for finding power from a young age, which is all very interesting, but again, I would disagree with this theory heavily. Dumbledore does have a grander plan to defeat Voldemort, yes, but that plan involves sacrificing his own life as well in the end. Something that was purely selfless and gave Snape the leverage he needed to get close to Voldemort. I suppose you could say that Dumbledore has a grand plan for many, yes, but I would argue that everyone who works for him does so willingly for the greater good of the world. Snape knew what he was signing up for, and when Harry ultimately does give up his life for the sake of defeating Voldemort, he also does so willingly. The one area where it is true is that Dumbledore, from a young age, definitely was a lot more corruptible. He didn't treat his family correctly and pushed them aside for the sake of finding the Deathly Hallows and what have you. Which, yes, is shitty and is something he seems to deeply regret and perhaps is making amends for with his sacrifice and general good towards the world, that sort of thing. Not to mention all the random characters that would have been thrown out on their ass in any other situation had it not been for Dumbledore coming to save them, have them work at Hogwarts, etc. Dumbledore being an evil mastermind is a cool idea in concept, but the context and contents of the books just plain don't match up with this theory. I mean, I guess my question to anyone that does think Dumbledore is evil is, to what end? What is his grand plan? But on that note, Zombie Dumbledore. Continuing with the idea that Dumbledore is possibly evil, many people think that the original reveal of Book 7 was going to be that Dumbledore was possessed by a Horcrux, given the zombie hints all across the book, as well as Dumbledore being more moody and described more like a lich in parts of the book. Again, things just don't really match up with this theory. I will hand it to the theory. Dumbledore definitely does act a lot more moody in the 6th book, and in particular, I remember when I first read it, and I guess, well, first saw it in the movie theater, when Harry needs to give that weird potion shit to Dumbledore, and he's, fine at first, but then starts acting crazy over it because the potion's making him go crazy. It's very uncomfortable to look at, but ultimately was the effect of the potion and not Dumbledore's true colors coming out or something like that. J.K. Rowling regrets Ron and Hermione. In her interview with J.K. Rowling, she claims it was wish fulfillment for Ron and Hermione to end up together, and that now, with some distance, she thinks Harry and Hermione would have made much more sense as a pairing. While many have wondered why she suddenly changed her mind about the final pairing in her own book series, if maybe fan reaction or something else prompted this response, nonetheless, it's interesting to hear the perspective of the author having regretted a pairing that they did. J.K. Rowling is projecting with Gilderoy. This theory proposes that Gilderoy, a person completely obsessed with themselves while stealing stories from other wizards, is Rowling projecting herself. Which, yeah, it's just kind of reaching, to be honest. I don't really know what basis this theory could really stand on. I mean, it'd be like saying J.R.R. Tolkien is projecting with Sauron, or fucking George Orwell is projecting with Napoleon. I mean, I guess you can just say that. I guess it's a theory, technically, but what exactly is it based on? On that note, and since we are in the Chamber of Secrets with all the other dark and danky shit, anyone ever think about the fact that Gilderoy, who is well known for his memory charms, which he uses on famous witches and wizards after he hears their stories and adventures, thus making them basically lose all their memories while he gets to pretend like all those stories were his? I mean, that's pretty fucked up and, awful. You ever think about the fact that he could use it for any other reason? Like he could murder somebody and then like maybe there's another person in the house or the room, or maybe there's like a bunch of people in the room and he just like turns all their memories off and so no one knows what happened anymore. Or, and this is really fucked up, what if he assaulted somebody and then wiped their memory afterward? Dude, what if he did that to students? I mean, to be clear, the books never say that he did that, and they weren't really hiding the fact that he was a bad guy, but I mean, he totally could have done it and no one would have known. Then again, with the right terrible mindset, you could see a lot of things in Harry Potter as being used for terrible, terrible things. I mean, love potions exist in this universe and are exceptionally strong. Surely it would count as assault if somebody did it with somebody who they, drugged essentially with the love potion. I mean, the books do kind of point this out, notably that Lord Voldemort was conceived by a witch who had been drugging a rich muggle man for months, essentially him through magic. In fact, it's because Voldemort was born under these conditions that he seems incapable of understanding love on any real level from the very day that he was born. The movies showcase this a little bit, but the books make it very clear that Voldemort was a heartless monster even as a child, and while it was his choices that determined this, on some level, he was given a rocky start by being born through the haze of a love potion, in a similar way to Harry Potter having been raised by complete asshole relatives and being treated like a servant or less than a human for years until the day he went to Hogwarts and found that he was a wizard. Though obviously, one became a man who would fight and sacrifice himself for all of the magic and non-magic world, while the other became the Dark Lord, a man who died in vain on his path to become an immortal god. So clearly one's choices, despite their upbringings, truly do make them who they are. But I digress. Rita Skeeter intended to be trans. So this theory is mostly based on her being described as having mannish hands, a surprisingly strong grip, a sharp jaw, and yeah, interesting idea, but there's not much more to it than that. Credence is Fawkes. In the extended cut of Fantastic Beasts 2, which I've actually never seen, Credence returns from the ash, and in a series that is recently revealed a woman as an evil snake, it lines up with some other tertiary evidence, such as Credence being revealed to be a Dumbledore, and lines from PR about Credence becoming a semi-important character. It's a possible theory since again, it's a 5-movie saga, and it isn't finished, so who knows? Maybe this Credence guy is Fawkes. I kinda wish Fawkes was just a fucking phoenix though. Book 7 is out of order. So some readers have noticed that the first heist into the Ministry of Magic reads like an introduction to the novel, which has had some people wondering if that chapter was going to be the opener for the novel originally, setting up the mysteries and getting the action rolling immediately before going backward and working our way back to that moment. I could kind of see it, but at the same time, the point where the book does start also feels a lot like a good opener anyway. This would also be a very non-linear opener. It doesn't really feel in line with the rest of the series. I mean, she totally could have been trying something very bold and different for the final book. If there's any book where you are going to do that, you might as well make it the final book. But I don't know. I'm kind of split on this one. And finally, J.K. Rowling lied. Many people believe that when J.K. Rowling said that she had the series planned out, she was lying. The evidence being that Book 7 has almost no overarching reveals about any of the ongoing mysteries dropped in the books. Horcruxes also seem to be an unplanned element, as they're only really revealed in full in Book 6. Many people believe the revelation of the Deathly Hallows had no build-up at all also, throughout the rest of the series, etc. I can see the arguments here, and it definitely has some credence. I could definitely see this all kind of being done by the seat of her pants. But all these things could have just as easily be argued that these plot points were all planned to be revealed when they're ultimately revealed. So I suppose it's up to you whether you think J.K. Rowling came up with all this in the end, or if she had it structured all the way back. Or maybe something in between, more likely. And that is it, ladies and...
You forgot the last one.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Last theory. Voldemort did nothing wrong. But, Voldy, there's no theory here. Nothing written after that.
It's not a theory. It's a fact.
Oh, really? Alright, we're gonna make like an owl and get the fuck out of here. Wow, that was quite an adventure you and me had. To think that was only the first day. Imagine what all the other days will be like. I bet it'll be an awesome time. But not half as awesome as all my patrons on Patreon, including all of my beloved night owlets, my super cool great night owl, the mystifying Medusa's Hex, and my godlike arch owls, the good chi vibes Zengarden party who made the upgrade, and the courageous carcinogenicist. I want to thank each and every single one of you for donating to this channel and taking it to very good places. If you want to join these fine guys and gals, then be sure to check out my Patreon page. Links down below. I also want to take this time to thank Kaizor over on Twitter for making this super awesome owl version of me. I love the use of colors and shading, and it's just amazing, so thank you so much, Kaizor. As well as I want to thank DDMcArtist on Instagram for making yet another piece of fan art around me. This one kind of inspired off of Ganondorf's design. The owl pendant necklace thing is so detailed and cool, and the cape made out of owl feathers is such a cool idea. Amazing job yet again. Links to both of these artists down below. And until next time, this has been Dylan the Night Owl, flying off.